Hello and welcome to another episode.
No, welcome. Come on. Better than that. Let's go.
Better than what? I'm too tired, Amar. How are you? You must be super
Tired,
excited. It looks
schmired. No, none of that. This was one of the second best race of the year, man. What are you talking about? We're
it's
ready to
true.
go.
It looks like old man Ferrari visited you in your sleep and kind of threw up all over you.
He did, baby. Yes, sir. We did.
Amazing. So
Yeah.
why are you so excited about this particular Grand Prix win? It's not even the first win of the season for Ferrari.
I know, but it certainly isn't the last one, right? Like that's what we're going to talk about today. I know everyone's talking about, oh, the race is boring. Okay, whatever. Yeah, I get it. It was boring when Max was winning by 30 seconds. Okay, this is a different kind of boring. Okay, this is a different flavor. Go ahead and have at it. It's Monaco. These some of these races you're not going to get overtaking. We can talk more about that. But hey, listen, man, we're back. We're back. And look, I'm going to say this right now. Put all the championships back on the table. We're all there. Max, not a runaway winner. Red Bull, not a runaway winner either. Let's put all of that there. There you go. Hot take.
Wow. Hot take based on
I mean, what? Listen. I mean, this race, yeah, and then last race and the race before, and the race before. I mean, there's one
what do
in
you mean the
there
race
like that.
before?
Really.
Do you mean the race before in Imola, where both Ferraris were out qualified by Max?
Yeah, because we got it wrong. We did something incorrect with the engine mode, and we lost some time on the straights. Also, that big fat rear wing didn't help.
Yeah,
But
and the race in Miami where he also out qualified you.
I love this, man. You've been keeping receipts on something where you're just saying out qualified, but it's the margins are so thin now. You know that, right? It's not like Max won
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Miami
yeah.
either. So,
Yeah, I guess I'm just pushing back on the Max isn't going to win the driver championship. I hear you're not saying he's not going to win it, but you're saying he's not going to be a runaway winner.
that's exactly right.
Um, okay, I think he's going to have to work a bit harder. I don't disagree with you on that. But what's your feeling about constructors? You think constructors,
Oh, the
it's
constructor is definitely
everything's
on, man. It's definitely on. I'm into it. Let's take it from the top, right? So,
yeah.
so, so, so Charles finally broke his curse, right? And I think that's probably the
Um,
biggest takeaway
this
from
is
the
the
whole
biggest thing,
weekend,
and
right?
I'm
Yeah.
super happy about that as well. Like super happy because the poor guy's been getting so much grief for such a long time, not just about the Monaco curse, but just about everything around the way he races and the mistakes and the it doesn't have a racing brain on him, all of which I've constantly said is nonsense. But races like this, weekends like this, like he put together, like there was a weekend where he put together a weekend this weekend where nobody was touching him. Like literally nobody was touching him. There was no ambiguity in my mind about who was going to be on pole on Saturday. And in reality, I wasn't even that worried about who was going to win the race on Sunday. I knew who it was going to be, and Charles was there. Didn't disappoint. Really good.
Yeah, I think the first thing I thought of during the race was how proud you would be because your guy Alain Prost would have been proud of Charles, right? In this effort of going as slow as you possibly can to win the race,
Hell yeah,
and
love
this
it.
was a masterclass in that. Like, I mean, he was like what 5 seconds behind quali time for the first 10 laps or so. That was crazy, man. So
Yeah,
uh,
I mean that seems to be a standard Ferrari street track tactic now, doesn't it?
it is. It is. Listen, man, going slow is an art too in fast cars. Like I don't know why people complain about that. Look, I get it. I get this was a boring race. And in reality, I think hearing a lot about like should we race in Monaco or should they change the track? I think it all kind of comes back to what we talked about last week, right? The cars are just way too big. It's not that overtaking cannot happen. It's just with these cars. I mean, we saw what happened at the beginning, right? But
I mean, not
it's
just
just
that,
not
they're so
possible.
wide right now that they're
Yeah,
sucking
you
their
can't.
advertising hoardings off the side. I mean,
Yeah,
that's nuts. They're
exactly.
clearly too big for these circuits. They were too big for Imola last weekend, and they're way too big for Monaco. Um, yeah, it's definitely an indictment of a race if the top 10 on the grid do not change order by the end of the race.
Yeah.
That's nuts. And look what happened to him.
Can I say this though? Can I say this like this Charles driver of the day? but really 3 races in a row. And this is a hat trick, man. Yet again, a Haas triggering and basically calling the result of the race is just like, this is undefeated, man. Like, this is debt, taxes, and Kevin Magnussen, man. He's affecting the outcome of 3 races in a row. You go back to this, like, this is once again, he's done it. How does he manage to do this, man?
I don't know. And I also don't know how he can come out in the post event interview with a straight face and say, "Oh, he didn't leave me any room."
Well,
Like,
but
go on,
okay,
Kev.
but see, you and I had this furious back and forth when Carlos got a penalty. And again, and one of the things I objected to in that is this inconsistent refereeing. Like, this is crazy. The fact that they didn't even investigate it, let alone penalize him, is just crazy. I don't even understand. Like, I know you're talking about first lap, but dude, you took out 2 cars. I mean, there's got to be some consequences. Here we were talking about in qualifying, right? Like, if you cause a red flag, you take away your fastest lap. Well, but you took out 2 cars effectively, and it didn't need to be done. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that was because did you see Anthony Davidson and Jenson
I
Button
did.
talking
I
about it
did.
afterwards that perhaps Perez did know that he was there and just moved over a little bit too early. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but in fact, I don't agree with that at all. Like it's not Perez's prerogative. Like it's
Exactly.
K-Mag that needed to back out. But I don't know if they looked at that and the fact that it was first lap and then just went, well, he put everybody out. Everybody ended their race. And there's probably a little bit of reluctance to give him any more penalty points, because that will definitely be a race ban. I mean, I just wonder if
There's
that's what they think.
16 races left on the
I tell you what, I
season.
do find this really interesting though that K-Mag has become the Roman Grosjean of Haas.
Really.
He has, hasn't he? You
He
remember
really has.
Roman?
He really has.
Roman, like, just doing a massive donut in the middle of turn 3 in Barcelona and taking everybody out with his tire smoke. You know, K-Mag has become that guy. It's like Haas have to have a demolition man within their team.
That is now Haas couldn't have had a worse weekend. I mean, on the heels of everything that's been going on behind the scenes with the lawsuits and stuff, like one Gunther Steiner would be proudly smiling. I think there was a cheeky tweet from him too, after qualifying. Like, that's something. Yes, it was an uninteresting race, right? By all stretch of the imagination. I am really happy for Leclerc. I also was really happy to see Carlos on the podium as well, and him and Oscar once again got together a little bit at the start, and
I
there's
know.
barely even contact there. Like, it was just ever so slight, right? And even in his post race, Carlos said that for whatever reason, Oscar and I are like magnets. Like, we tend to find each other, even though we're otherwise cool. And I'm glad he said that, by the way, because I've heard a lot of chatter from Oscar Piastri fans saying Carlos hates him and yada yada yada. And for the two drivers to be sitting there and laughing it out, that was kind of interesting. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, probably easier to laugh it out when Carlos has had a hard reset. I have to say, Carlos continues his run as the luckiest crasher in F1 at the moment. He did it in
Yeah.
China, and then he did it again. But actually, yeah, I thought both Ferrari drivers drove great races, but man, Oscar. Okay, we have to give Oscar his
Yeah,
flowers,
let's do
right?
that. Yeah, yeah.
Because we've been talking about Oscar having a difficult run through no fault of his own for the last couple of races. Miami,
You didn't
he
have
didn't
that.
get all of the upgrades, it was still quicker. And then in Imola, he had that 3-place grid penalty that put him off the front row and kind of dictated the rest of his race. Here, none of that. He outqualified Lando on pace.
Yeah.
And, once you've done that in Monaco, it doesn't really matter how bad your time management is. Apparently, you can still stay in position, and he did that really well. That's what he
Yeah.
drove a mature race. His comments afterwards were really mature. There wasn't any sort of overhyped esty bestie stuff. It was good.
No,
And
yeah.
like this is now 3 races on the trot where I think Oscar's probably had the better performance over the course of the weekend, but hasn't really had, but finally has had the result to show for it. And hopefully that will give him the confidence going forward if he needed any. He's not somebody that I think lacks confidence or even looks like he lacks it. But hopefully this will be
Well,
a continuation of him performing as well as he is. And I think Lando really needs to be worried because he should know in the back of his mind that circumstances have played a big part in the results that he has got and the performances that he has been able to put in over the last three
yeah.
races.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we have consistently given Oscar praise over the last three races and even before that. In fact, in our preseason predictions, we actually predicted him to beat Lando over the course of the season. And I think it's clearly there. He's proving that he is, he's definitely in the top tier now, right? As far as at least this season goes and the rest of the season. I think there are effectively four drivers that are in the mix. I would say as they can be for the championship, to
Yeah.
the extent that they can be relative to Red Bull right or Max right now. But he's I mean, and McLaren are going to have a hard time, right? If he keeps going this way, like who is their number one guy, right? I mean, they're gonna have to figure this out. Maybe not this year, but certainly coming into next year, that would
Yeah,
be
but Amar,
headache.
but perhaps performances will dictate it, you
Maybe,
know.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and often that is the way that over the course of a season, even if you have two closely aligned drivers, typically one of them over the course of the season will find a way to just a couple of hundredths quicker in qualifying, just eke out a little bit more out the tires, just be in the right place at the right time a bit more. And eventually that person, that driver, um, ends up in the pound seats. Um, and these are long seasons now, right? So a sample set of one or two races isn't
yeah,
enough to tell you that that's the
yeah,
trend that's going
yeah,
to go on for the rest of the season. So
yeah.
even if Oscar's had a bit of bad luck in two races, that you'd expect that over 24, that bad luck tends to even out.
Well, I
Um,
also think it's a little bit of playing with house money, though, right? Because Lando has been with the team as long as he has, right? There is a little bit of pressure on you as the guy who's been there for a while. Now, granted, McLaren are nowhere close to being relevant in the championship race for all these years, barring this year, really, and maybe even arguably not at the start of this year, right? So there is a little bit of that as well, whereas Oscar's playing with house money, and he does seem to have the temperament and the driving style, as you pointed out, right, in doing the telemetry videos, that he has this like very Jensen Button-esque kind of way of dealing with, how he sort of approaches turns and just being efficient, it looks like all around, right? And I think
but I
that
do
pays
think,
off.
yeah, just about that. I don't want that to sound like I'm doing Oscar a disservice, right? I like Jensen, and
Faster Jensen is what we said. Yeah.
yeah, we did. I like Jensen, and I appreciate the smooth style. It works really well in those damp, changeable conditions. But I've never really thought of him as an out and out super fast guy. Whereas I feel like Oscar has that as his baseline, that sort of smooth driving style, but is able to adapt to what the car needs a bit more than what Jensen could. Like Jensen needed to have a very particular set of traits in his car to be able to extract the most out of it. When he was at Brawn in the early part of that season, that's what he had, and he was able to make hay. Oscar, I think, and you've seen it throughout his junior career as well, that even if he's thrown a bit of a curveball, it might take him a few races, but he'll get on top of it. And the tire management thing with him is the thing that I'm most impressed by. Like it was noticeably a drawback of his performances last season. Like qualifying wasn't a problem, but
Yeah.
but tire management was. And this season he turned up immediately in Bahrain, and there was a step improvement. And he's continued to improve that. That for me, that adaptability, that understanding of where I need to work and what work I need to put into to improve, that's the mark of a great driver.
Yeah.
Um, and I think Oscar's got that.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely true. I think it doesn't surprise any of us that he's where he's at, and I think a race win is coming for him. It's just a matter of, I guess, right circumstances. But I think this is what makes it easy, and interesting rather, and it makes it an interesting season indeed. Should we talk about Red Bull then? Huh? They
I guess we're gonna
what
have
kind of
to.
how do we sum up Red Bull's weekend? Like I don't quite know. Like I mean, other than I how do you feel about Max being so jokey, right? Because that's not the kind of Max I have come to know over the years. But like, I feel like is this a way of letting out stress in the media or like publicly? Like, is this one of those things? Because he seems overly chummy and jokey in these situations where he knows I mean, I'm thinking back to Miami, right? And of course this race, I mean, I've seen some weird quotes coming out of him. It just Max has had such a fierce nature to himself, right? It's just odd.
I don't know if it's who he's competing against right now. I don't know if that's what it is because the guys that he's up against now, the Landos, the Oscars, the Charleses of this world, they don't have the results behind them. None of them are world champions. They don't have hundreds and hundreds of wins behind them either. So I just wonder if like the reason he can be like that, the reason he can sort of feel so magnanimous about his mate Lando winning a race, or be cool about the fact that Charles won a race and his Red Bull finished sixth, is that ultimately over the course of a 24 race season, and especially how this season has started, I don't think he sees them as a threat to his own ability. Like he thinks he's got them all covered. And you'd have to argue that if you look at somewhere like Miami, not Miami, Imola, that if there's a sniff, obviously if the car can't do it, that's not his fault, right? And in Monaco, his car wasn't there to do it. But when the car isn't quite there, but potentially has the potential to be there, he makes a difference. And I think he has an inner confidence that he can do that and will put these guys in the shade. Whereas if you put someone like Lewis into that equation, I think it becomes a lot more that there's a more needle in that. He becomes much less happy to
So
have conceded a performance because of the reputation that that person brings. And I don't think he ever wants to look um
that's it.
like he's backing down against someone that has a big reputation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That's
So
my take on it, but I don't know how you see it.
it does sound a bit like, I mean, I do think there's an element of that, right? I mean, when he was going up against Lewis, he was going up against a seven-time world champion, right? That was a different deal versus, you're right, a lot of the guys he's now competing with for podiums and or wins are people that are probably hunting him, right? So it's kind of a different thing in some ways,
Yeah,
right? And and
yeah,
and
yeah.
I think there's an element of that. I do think that there's something in the psychology, the psyche that goes back to the team struggle, and I think that there's more to it than just because Max has this sort of resigned sort of way of saying things, which is very unlike him in many ways. Now, I'm not suggesting at this point that's there's a downfall or anything, but I think it's very clear now that the cracks are forming and they're probably becoming more and more clear with every race, right? Because when you put them under pressure, now you're starting to see them not being able to respond.
Yeah, like they don't have
Um,
the answers anymore, right? Which
they don't
which is
have the
very,
answers.
very unlike Red Bull. And it's kind of different to last year, right? In that Perez has always been a good street track racer, right? He's always performed really well around Monaco. Last year was obviously a bit of an anomaly, but in 22 he was good around Monaco, he was good around Baku. Those are races where he does really well. And even if Max isn't able to always bring home the bacon in those very particular situations, Perez seems to step up his game a little bit more. Hasn't done that this season, though, has he? In fact, when the
Well,
cars drop back and Red Bull have struggled to get their setup and their performances right, Perez has dropped back even further.
even
Like it's
more, yeah,
really hurt
even
him.
even more. And I wonder if so. We joked about this when we talked about livery launch, right? Like, is the RB20 quicker than the RB19, right? I mean, we kind of. I remember saying something sort of tongue in cheek, saying if RB20 doesn't work, just bring back RB19 like that. That was last year's, and I don't know that that's the case anymore, though, right? But it's kind of interesting, right? And again, you cannot. I know Adrian Newey wasn't everything at Red Bull, but he was at least
He's
something.
still
He still
working there
is,
now,
right?
isn't
And
he?
then
Yeah.
ironically, just sort of seeing him again at the racetrack, that was just weird. Altogether, I feel like he's doing prep work for maybe eventually joining Ferrari, dare I say. But he was out there. I think there was a shot of him reviewing the McLaren. I think he was looking at he probably looked at all the cars, but it's weird. It just feels weird. It doesn't feel like they have the answers. They just don't. And we talked about this at the end of Imola, right? How many races are we going to have to see Max sort of pull the win out of defeat, right? And this was one of the races where he couldn't really do anything. It was lost on Saturday, but on Saturday itself, he struggled really, really badly.
Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of sequential progression, isn't it? That in Miami he lost, but probably should have won if it hadn't been for a safety car. He probably had the car to do it. And then in Imola, didn't
Yeah,
quite have the car to do it, but did pull it off. And this weekend didn't have the car, didn't pull it off.
yeah.
And you can see that there's a sequential progression of deterioration in the Red Bull performance, and that's over a variety of different tracks now: low speed, high speed, medium speed corners. They're struggling a little bit to get the car dialed in, week out, which is something that they just didn't have a problem with last year, unless you were at Singapore.
So I want to ask you this because in everything that I've read and heard thus far and watched, I think the general consensus is that, everybody's giving deference and respect to Red Bull, right? Because we've seen them be so dominant over the last couple of years plus, right? Like, at what point do we now, is it now? Are we there yet? Or is it, what do you need to see,
Sure.
Shaz, to say, okay, well, it is really up for grabs? Because
I don't think there's necessarily a tipping point. It's just race to race. We're just now in a position since McLaren and Ferrari have brought major upgrades that seem to have worked. And I have drivers that are hungry. That you have every weekend, Red Bull can't just rely on the fact that they have a fundamentally quicker car than everybody else. There's a little bit more nuance to the work they have to do. And you can't see it. They're still doing it. They're still making progress from free practice through to qualifying with all of the simulator work that Sebastian Buemi and Liam Lawson are doing back at the factory. But there's a window now that there wasn't there before. There's a window where other teams can get them.
yeah.
Not necessarily even if they make a mistake, just on pure performance, there's a window for them to make to stamp their authority on a weekend. And that's what we're starting to see. I guess my problem is that Monaco is a bit of a case in point, really, right? Because once you start on pole, that's kind of the
It. Yeah,
weekend,
yeah.
the weekend finished, isn't it?
I want to talk quickly about Checo, right? Because this is what, 1, 2, 3 races in a row, right? I think is going to happen. And we make the switch or no?
What will happen? Out in quali one, out within one corner. It's not great. Look, I don't think the accident was
No,
his fault
not
necessarily, but
necessarily.
he was in that position because he qualified really badly and then had a really bad start. So yeah, his performances aren't doing him any favors, and that's odd, isn't it? Because a few races ago we were saying, well, actually, Checo's
Checo might
doing
be
the business.
secure.
He's
Yeah.
he's, he's actually got it. Um, but then you kind of have to look at the alternatives. Now, like we said, I'm a big Yuki fan. I think he's done really well. Whether or not Red Bull see that he's enough of an upgrade or not, I think the answer to that is fairly well known. No. And it doesn't seem to matter what Yuki does. They don't seem to want to give him a chance. And if they're looking outside the Red Bull family, because I don't think Daniel Ricciardo is a viable option right
No.
now. He's definitely a downgrade on Perez right now. Um, Carlos is still there. Um, he's probably the best alternative, but it looks like he's looking at, at teams elsewhere. You know, even if it's not Audi, he's looking at Williams at the moment. What
Yeah.
did you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't read much into the rumors. I mean, there's a strong sort of signs to Williams. I feel like a lot of these things are floated in the media just to create some kind of leverage, right? I do believe the Red Bull seat is open for Sainz. I think the question is, can he do it with a 1 year contract, right? Because that seems to be what they want to give him, but
Yeah.
he wants multiple years, which I can understand, but
Well, they're not going to switch him in the middle of a season, right? So I
not
guess
right
your
now,
question is
no.
actually who, like, if they switch Checo out mid-season, who do they put in that
Well, I
seat?
mean, I would say, I mean, to your point, like, I mean, they seem keen to not give Yuki a chance, but what's there to lose at this point? I mean, Yuki seems to be doing really well.
Mate,
Like, what is it?
mate,
I
I'm
don't
not going to lie.
understand.
I,
Like,
I I think if
why?
they swap somebody out, they'll put Liam Lawson in that seat before they put Yuki in that seat. which is a
Why?
which is
What do we not know about this? Is there beef? Is there something?
I,
Because
I genuinely do not understand it. Like people in the comments, I'm sure will say, "Oh, he lacks temperament and he gets angry and he's hot-headed." The thing is, sure, he might do that from time to time, but right now his performances are rock solid,
yeah,
and they
I
have
mean,
been for 2 seasons. Even last year when he was out qualified by Liam Lawson, two of those races, he was one taking engine penalties in Mexico, the second dropped off on the start line before the race even started in Monza. So it wasn't a fair comparison. But actually, he took care of Nick De Vries. He took care of Daniel Ricciardo. He's taking care of him right now as well. The next the great hope returns. Um, I don't see why he shouldn't get a chance. But the feeling that I get whenever this comes up is that Red Bull are looking for somebody else, and that's why I put forward that I think Liam
yeah.
Lawson's more likely to get that seat than Yuki is, which would look terrible, by the way.
That would look terrible, and that would mean that Yuki is going elsewhere too, right? That would probably be
Yeah, yeah,
he sort of had the Pierre Gasly route of maybe going somewhere else
yeah.
eventually,
But I
because
hope
that's
it
not
doesn't
good.
dump him out of Formula One though, because
Yeah,
I think based on the performances that he's had over the past couple of
yeah,
seasons, he definitely deserves to still have a seat in Formula One somewhere.
yeah. It was a okay race for Mercedes. Like they look like they might
Yeah.
have been in the mix for. I mean, they keep saying that they had a shot at getting pole and winning the race. Like that seemed like a bit of a stretch to me. But I don't know. What do you think? Like,
Well, I mean, there's still it was the usual kind of FP1, FP2. You'll see Lewis up in like in the top two spots, and then come qualifying, he's suddenly ninth and behind George. Like, it's just so weird. Um, uh, yeah, they're still talking about the fact that they're on the right trajectory. They have some big updates coming for Canada, which is the next race up. So we'll see which way that's going. I think that really is going to be the proof of the pudding. Another watershed moment for them. Following on from so many in the past. This time it all sounds different, but it's kind of sounded different every time they say it. But yeah, it'd be nice to see that they're back in the mix. Even if it's just to see that there's like four teams in the running for race wins and good performances. I think the car is not worthy of the drivers that are piloting it at the moment. And George probably seems to be getting the most out of it in qualifying. And for some reason, Lewis had a pretty lackluster race, didn't he? There was this whole go on. I think you're gonna talk
no,
about
that's
this,
fine.
but the
No.
whole the whole communication about why did you not tell me it was a critical
I mean,
outlap.
I mean, this is two races in a row where I'm like, what are you guys getting upset about? Like they're so bored. They know they have no chance at winning. That this is what we're fighting about, right? Like last race with George kind of pitting and shouldn't have been pitting or whatever. Who cares? Like, what difference does it
Well,
make?
I
It
mean, they
wasn't
did. I
gonna
mean,
really
but
like
well, that could have been the only swap in the top 10. Like Lewis probably had the pace to outrace Max,
Max.
and
It
they
wasn't gonna
met.
happen. Like,
I think so. I think there was enough undercut potential there to get past him,
this
but
is
he then
it's
didn't he then didn't put it in the lap.
I mean, we know that separations are not, as much as you try to try to make them as painless as possible. They're more painful than you like for it to be. And this is yet another example of it. I think there was another example of what Lewis said in post qualifying. It seemed like he's in some ways not getting whatever George is getting because they've kind of put all their eggs in the George basket.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
don't know if that's Lewis doing
I
my
think that
play or
was
like, but I mean
I,
these.
I think that was a bit disingenuous, man, because I think he was offered the wing, and then he then said, "Nah, I don't want it. I'd rather have the old wing." And there were good reasons for that. Like
Yeah,
what he didn't
we
want to
know.
do was have an accident with the new wing and then have to go back to the old wing and then break Park Ferme. All very sound reasons, but ultimately that wing brought performance, and George had it, and that was down to Lewis saying he didn't want it.
Yeah, but I also again, I mean, this is again another race where I mean, George was behind quite a bit, right? But to the Ferraris and I have to see how far behind he was the
It
McLarens,
was like
right? And
he
then
was like 16, 17
16 seconds
seconds
and in Monaco, right?
behind.
And so
Yeah.
this was like, and I get it, they had to do a little bit of tire managing because they had, They kind of had the
They're on the
opposite
mediums, weren't they?
strategies,
And
right?
yeah,
And I get it. And George did really well of defending Max, though. It did feel like at one point Max was going to be able to get past him. But again, with a circuit like this, like it wasn't going to really happen, right? And
yeah,
so it's hard for
yeah,
me to take them seriously, right? Because even if they did look more competitive than they did on this circuit, I'm not sure I'd buy into them, right? Because again, Monaco is such an atypical circuit where there's so many things that are negated just by the layout of the track, by everything that it's. I don't know. I wouldn't
yeah.
take much from them,
But this
but
is but okay. But this is that duvet thing again. So remember last week we were talking about James Allison saying that their performance is like a small duvet. That if you cover up your head, your feet get cold, and if you cover up your feet, your head get cold. Well, Monaco doesn't have a wide range of corner types. It's just all
exactly.
slow, and Canada will be similar. Although there's big straights, actually the corners are low
Yeah.
speed corners,
Right.
um, and if they're bringing a big upgrade to Canada, you'd expect that given how narrow their performance window is, if they've widened that performance window, but can get the car set up for the very narrow requirements of Canada, you should see a step forward. And if you
You
don't,
should. You should, but
if
I
you
think
don't,
now
then
the
then we
problem
have
for
to
them
worry.
now is that they are out of sync with the other two chasers, right? And they look like they're further behind. I mean, I don't know what happened to Aston along the way, but something happened to them where they're not able to. None of their upgrades seem to work, but they've kind of caught a break in that, right? Because otherwise they'd kind of be with Aston or maybe even behind them in some ways. I think they've got bailed
Yeah,
out by
yeah,
the
yeah.
whole idea. So it's just one of those things. So it's kind of interesting to see that. Okay, so on that note, thank you for watching. Please comment, please subscribe, please let us know how we're doing.